Hello everyone and welcome to the Excel Macros Workshop. I am one of the Purdue student software trainers and I will lead you guys today through this workshop. It is important to mention that I will be going over how to record a macro, how to attach macros to buttons. I'm also going to show you guys how to create macros for formatting and how to create macros for navigation. As always, the first step will be to open up Excel, so just go ahead and navigate to where Excel is and open it up. Once you do have that opened up, go ahead and select the blank workbook. We want to start with a new workbook. And then I'm just going to go ahead and maximize, that way you guys can see Excel better. And then I'm going to start with the developer tab, which if we go to our tabs, we actually don't see a developer tab. And in order to execute, record, and write macros, we need the developer tab. So the first step would be to enable that. Go ahead and navigate to where the Excel preferences is, and we want to customize the ribbon and toolbar, so make sure that you select that. And then once I have that, I'm going to focus on the right hand side to where the main tabs are. And as you guys can see, if I scroll to the bottom, all of the tabs are enabled except for the developer tab. So make sure that you check that checkbox and then go ahead and hit save. And then after that, you just have to go ahead and exit out of that. And as you guys can see, a developer tab should open up for you guys. Some of the basics of macros is that when it comes to saving a worksheet with macros, there are some special settings you have to consider. So if I want to save a worksheet and it has macros, I have to go to File, Save As, and then I need to change the file format. I can't just save it as an Excel workbook. I have to select it and then on the drop down menu and then select the Excel macro enabled workshop format. And the reason why is because that if I don't, then Excel will not save my macros, and the next time I open up Excel, all of the macros in the spreadsheet would be erased. So make sure that when you're saving the Excel macro enabled workbook is selected. And then just go ahead and hit save. And now from now on, if I want to save, all I have to do is select the save icon. Now let's create our first macro. So a macro is a script that executes predefined steps. So macros are useful for automating tasks as well as increasing the efficiency of your workflow while working in Excel. So these steps are defined using a scripting language, which is called Visual Basic for Applications, or just VBA for short. And instead of writing VBA scripts, Excel gives us the option to record our actions as a script. So we don't actually have to code. All we have to do is do the actions once, and then it will be recorded by Excel. So when we record a macro, Excel keeps track of every mouse click and keystroke. Then it stores it into that VBA script that I mentioned earlier, and then you can run that VBA script and Excel will run all of the mouse clicks and keystrokes you executed while recording the macro. So let's create our first macro, like I said earlier, and to do that we have to select a cell. So I'm just gonna go ahead and select B2. And then I'm going to go to the developer tab, and then I'm going to make sure that I have selected use relative references. You know that it's selected when it's highlighted. And the reason why I want to do that, it's because the use relative references causes everything in the macro to be recorded relative to the cell you have selected when you begin recording your macro. So I'm going to show you guys why that's important later. But then after that, I'm just going to go ahead and select the record macro, and then it's going to bring in a record macro window. I'm just going to go ahead and make my macro name Hello Macros. Now, an important thing to mention is that you are not allowed to use spaces in your macro name, so just keep that in mind. And then I'm just going to go ahead and select OK. and then now everything I do now is being recorded. So I'm just going to go ahead and type in the cell that I've selected, so B2. I'm just going to go ahead and type hello macros. And then I'm just going to go ahead and format this a little bit. So I'm going to go back to the Home tab, and I'm going to make the color, let's say blue, and I'm going to center my text. And then I think that is good enough for me. So then after that, I'm just going to go ahead and select two cells to the left, to the right of the one that I just created. So that would be D2. And then I'm just going to go ahead and go to the developer tab and then select stop recording. So now that we have stopped recording, we're going to run our macro. So to do that, go ahead and navigate to the developer tab, and then instead of selecting record macro, we're going to select macros, the button, and then we're going to select the macro that we've just created, so it was hello macros, and then to run it, all you have to do is select the blue run button. And then once you do, when you run your macro, it will take the cell that you selected, so we selected D2, and then it will apply the formatting that we specified. So it was the blue cell, and then we typed in hello macros, and then it selected the cell 2 to the right, so that was F2 for me. Now, it is important to note that you cannot undo a macro. So we typically try to avoid macros that delete or overwrite other cells. So you might have noticed that when we started recording our macro, we had an option of assigning a keyboard shortcut to our macro. Now, if you didn't, it's okay because we can bring that option back again. So if you go ahead and select macros, and then instead of hitting, make sure that you have hello macro selected, and instead of hitting run, you can go to options, and then it's going to bring in that macro options window again, and you can assign it a shortcut to it. Now, it is an important thing to note is that if you choose a shortcut like C, so if you want to do Command C, that shortcut already exists. So if I try to do C and hit OK, Excel is going to tell me that I can't do that because Command C is already being used for something else. So make sure that you keep that in mind. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit OK and select something that isn't being used. So for example, E. And then if I hit OK, then it's going to let me. And then I'm just going to go ahead and hit cancel. Now another thing that we can do is add buttons to a macro. And to do that, all we have to do is make sure that you're in the developer tab. And for me, it's the button. I'm just going to go ahead and select that. And then if I click and drag, I'm going to make my button 4 cells long. And then I'm just going to go ahead and it's going to ask me what macro I want to assign that button to. So I'm just going to go ahead and select hello macros and then hit OK. And then as you guys can see, that button 1 is created. Now, another important thing to keep in mind is that you might have multiple buttons, so consider naming them something more descriptive than button 1 just so that you can keep track of which button does what. So I'm just going to go ahead and rename my button. All I did was clicked inside the name, and then I'm just going to go ahead and name it hello. I forgot the H, hello macros. And then once I do, I'm just going to go ahead and select anywhere else to get rid of the text or the text cursor. And then to use this macro, all I have to do is select it. And as you guys can see, the same thing happens. My hello macros is being run. So now that we know how to make macros, I'm going to show you guys how this might be useful. So I'm just going to go ahead and go up to File, and I'm going to select open, and I'm going to go ahead and navigate to an Excel sheet that I already have ready, so the food truck data, and I'm just going to go ahead and open that. And as you guys can see, we now have a spreadsheet with a bunch of information and about the sales of several food trucks. So we have quite a few food trucks in here. It might take a while. It is taking a bit of time to load, but it's okay. Now, as you guys can see, we have a problem. If you guys look at the date, it's just a bunch of hashtag signs or pound signs. However, when I click on it, it does say the date on the bar. However, I can't see it on the actual Excel document. And the reason why is because the formatting of the date is wrong. Right now it's set to long date, and we have to change it to short date. So if I select my first date, which is B2, all I have to do is go up to where it says date, and then go ahead and select short date. And as you guys can see, I can now properly see what the date is. Now what I can do is do that same thing for all of the dates, and keep in mind that we do have multiple food trucks, so it will take a while. Now another thing that we can do is make a macro that will do it for us. So to do that, we first have to select the first item in the row that has a date entry, so that would be B2. And then we're going to have to go to the developer tab, and where it says record macro, I'm just going to go ahead and select that and make sure that the use relative references is still selected. And then I'm just going to go ahead and record the macro. And this time I'm going to name it something different, and I'm going to name it to change date format. And I'm just going to make this the letter D capitalized so that it's easier to read. Format. And then after that, I'm just going to give it another keyboard shortcut. So I'm going to give it N and then select OK. And then once you select OK, everything you do from now on is going to be recorded into the macro. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll to the end of the row. So that would be over here. So for me, it's AQ2. And then I'm just going to go ahead, while holding the shift key, I'm going to select that last date. And then what that does is that it will select every cell in the row. So after you've done that, go ahead and go to the Home tab, and then where it says date, go ahead and change that to short date. And as you guys can see, it changes all of the long dates to a short date format, and it is now readable. Once you have that, just go ahead and go to the Developer tab and select Stop Recording, and we now have our macro. Now before I move on, I'm just going to go ahead and quickly save. And like I mentioned earlier, what we have to do is change the Excel from Excel workbook to Excel macro enabled workbook, because we want our macros to be saved. So I'm just going to go ahead and select save. And then after that, I'm just going to go ahead and whenever I want to save from now on, all I have to do is use the save icon. And now that we have everything recorded, I'm just going to go ahead and change the rest of the long date formats to short date formats. So I'm just going to go ahead and select Control N. And as you guys can see, it is changing to it is running the macro that I've created. So I'm just going to go ahead and quickly change everything so that we can see it all. And one last one. And now that we have all of our dates formatted and the document looks 10 times better now. Macros are very powerful. Another thing that you can do is use macros for navigation. So everything you do is recorded while recording a macro. So even navigating through the document. So in this step, we're now going to create a macro that sends us back to the top of the document. And to do that, I'm just going to go ahead and scroll all the way to the bottom. And then once I do, I'm just going to go ahead and go to the developer tab, and looks like I'm already on it. And then this time I'm going to go ahead and make sure that the use relative references is not selected. So make sure that is no longer highlighted. And then I'm just going to go ahead and begin recording my macro by pressing the record macro. And I'm just going to go ahead and name that Go Home. And then after that, I'm just going to go ahead and give it the keyword shortcut of capital H. And keep in mind how the shortcut to get there is now changed. So with capital H, I have to press Control Shift H. So keep that in mind. And then I'm just going to go ahead and select OK. And now everything you do is being recorded. So I'm just going to go ahead and scroll all the way to the top and select the first cell, which is A1. And then after that, I'm just going to go ahead and go to stop recording. And then once I do, to use the macro, if I scroll from like all the way over here and then I hit Control Shift H, as you guys can see, I'm taking all the way to the top. Now another thing that I can do is assign a button to that. So if I'm going to go ahead and scroll all the way down to underneath Jacob's Gelato, and I'm just going to go ahead and add a button here. So using the developer tab, I'm going to create a new button, and then I'm just going to make it to a 2x2, and then I'm going to assign it the Go Home macro, and I'm just going to go ahead and hit OK. And again, we might have multiple buttons later on, so I'm just going to go ahead and rename my button to something that's more useful. So I'm just going to go ahead and name it Go Home. And then once I do, all I have to do is press it. And as you guys can see, I am taken to A1. So now I'm going to show you guys how to use the navigation and the macros and buttons to make a table of contents. So to do that, I'm going to first go ahead and create a new worksheet. So where it says food truck data, I'm just going to go ahead and create a new one. And I'm going to name it something more meaningful than sheet 3. So I'm just going to go ahead and name it contents. And after that, I'm just going to go ahead and create a new macro. So I'm just going to make sure that use relative references is unselected or not highlighted. And then I'm going to record macro. And I'm going to name it Nathan Nachos, which is, in case you guys don't know, it is the name of the first food truck that's on the worksheet. After that, I'm just going to go ahead and not assign it a shortcut key because it's going to be a button. So I'm just going to go ahead and select OK. And keep in mind that everything that I do now is being recorded. So I'm just going to go ahead and navigate back to food truck data. And because A2 is no longer I want to select A1, however, it is already selected for me. So I'm just going to go ahead and select somewhere that's not A1 and then select A1 again. And then after that, I'm just going to go ahead and stop recording. And then I'm going to navigate to contents and I'm going to add a new button. And then once I do, I'm just going to go ahead and click. And looks like it didn't select it for me. There we go, making sure that it's selected. You know that you're adding a button when the cursor changes to that crosshair. So go ahead and click and drag. And then I'm going to assign it the macro that I've just recorded. So that was Nathan Nachos. And I'm just going to go ahead and select OK. Once I do, I'm going to rename my button to something more meaningful than button 1 because it is a table of contents, so we are going to have multiple buttons. So I'm just going to go ahead and name it the name of the food truck. So Nathan Nachos. And then once I do, I'm just going to go ahead and click outside of it. And if I go ahead and press it, as you guys can see, I am taking to Nathan's Nachos. So now I'm going to use the same concept for the rest of the food trucks. So I'm going to next go to Glow's Burritos. So I'm just going to go ahead and go back to contents. And I'm going to repeat the same steps. So I'm going to record a macro. And I'm going to name it the name of the food truck. So it was Glow's Burritos. And then I'm just going to go ahead and not assign it a shortcut key, select OK. And then now that my macro is recording, I'm going to go to food truck data. I'm going to scroll down to Glow's Burritos, and I'm just going to go ahead and select that cell, which is A27. And then I'm just going to go ahead and stop recording the macro. And then I'm going to go back to the contents. I'm going to select the button, and I'm going to create a new one for Glow's Burritos. And I'm just going to make it the same size as Nathan's Nachos, and I'm going to go ahead and select the Glow Burritos macro that I've just created, and then I'm just going to go ahead and select OK. And then I am going to rename it to Glow's Burritos again, just to keep track of everything. So I'm going to go ahead and rename it Glow's Burritos. And then if I do, if I click on it, as you guys can see, I am taken to Glow's Burritos. So one thing that I didn't show you guys was how to resize buttons or move them around after they've been created. Because if you go ahead and select on the button to try and resize it, it's going to run the macro. So if you want to, you can either right click on the button or you can double tap if you have a Mac. And if you do, it's going to go ahead and allow you to move the button that you've created once, so that it is a little bit more organized, because it is a table of contents, so we don't want the buttons to be all over the place. We want them to be easy to find and easy to use. Once you have your buttons where you want to be, I'm just going to go ahead and move on to the rest of the food trucks. So if you go ahead, and I'm going to go back to the developer tab, and I'm just going to go ahead and record another macro, and this time it's going to be the next food truck, which is Josho's Tacos. So I'm just going to go ahead and name it that. And then I'm just going to go ahead and select OK. And then once I do, everything that I do now is being recorded. So I'm just going to go to the food truck data. I'm going to scroll down to where Josho's Tacos is. And then I'm going to select Josho's Tacos, which is A54. And I'm just going to stop recording. Then I'm going to go to the contents spreadsheet. And I'm going to add a new button, and I'm going to go ahead and make it the same size as the other buttons, and I'm going to assign it the Josho's Tacos and select OK. And then once I do, I'm just going to go ahead and rename it to the food truck name. So it was Josho's Tacos. And then once I do, all I have to do to resize it is double click. Or if you're in a Mac, you can double tap. And I'm sure you guys, if I go ahead, I'm going to show you guys if I hit Josho's Tacos, it takes me to that place in the spreadsheet. So now that you guys know how to make a table of contents that navigates to different areas of the spreadsheet, I'm going to show you guys one last thing, and that is the basic introduction to VBA. So, like I mentioned earlier in the video, the VBA is a language that Excel uses to describe macros. So every time a macro is recorded, it gets recorded as a VBA script. So let's look at the macros we recorded as a VBA. So go ahead and open up the VBA editor, and to do that, make sure that the developer tab is selected, and then go ahead and navigate to Visual Basic. Once you have the Microsoft Visual Basic opened up, if you guys look at the left hand side where it says modules, and you can go ahead and expand that, and as you guys can see, we have module 1. This is where all of our macros that we've just created for the food truck data spreadsheet are. Now, what I can do is directly make a macro here, so you can right click in the modules folder, or if you're in a Mac, you can double click, and then you can go ahead and navigate to insert module, and I'm just going to create a very simple macro here, nothing too complicated. So I'm just going to go ahead and name it Hello World. So this is me naming the macro. And then I'm just going to go ahead and, before I actually type in the code for the macro, I'm going to make a comment for what the macro does. So I want my macro to be to greet the user. And I'm going to go ahead and type in the actual code now. I'm going to tab over a space and type in the command message box, hello world. And that's it for my code. So a quick tip, everything after an apostrophe, so a simple macro greet the user, a simple macro to greet the user, a simple macro to greet the user. So everything after an apostrophe is a comment, and Excel sees that apostrophe and skips over that line. So the reason why a simple macro is not going to get run is because it has an apostrophe before that. However, message box doesn't, so it is going to get run. And to run the command or the macro that we've just created, all I have to do is go up to the blue triangle, select it, and then as you guys can see, it does exactly what I told it was going to do. So it gave me a message box where it says hello world, and as you guys can see, it says hello world. Now, a cool thing about this is that we can go back to the worksheet that we had, and what I can do is go ahead and make a new button, and you can, if you guys scroll down, as you guys can see, I have that hello world macro that I've created over in the Visual Basic editor. So if I go ahead and select OK, and I'm just going to go ahead and quickly rename it to something that is useful, because again, I don't want undescriptive buttons. I'm just going to go ahead and name it Greet User. And if I go ahead and select it, as you guys can see, there is the macro that I've created, and that is Hello World. And to get rid of it, all I have to do is hit OK. We have reached the end of the workshop. This is all I have for you guys for Excel macros. Again, my name is Daphne. I am one of the Purdue student software trainers. We provide software training to instructors, organizations, or individuals. If you guys have any questions or want to learn more, feel free to contact us.